Hey everybody, this is a section from The Right Opposition, the Lovestonites, and the International Communist Opposition of the 1930s by Robert J. Alexander. The section that I'm going to be reading today is titled The POUM, or the Party of Marxist Unification, and the Spanish Civil War. If I can get this computer to cooperate. Here we are. The POUM was destined to have somewhat less than 2 years of legal existence. During that period, it played an active role through the limited role in the election of 1936 and was an important factor in the social revolution which swept Republican or loyalist Spain during the first months of the Civil War. However, the Party of Marxist Unification fell victim to Stalin's drive to gain total control of the Spanish Republic and to manipulate the Civil War to serve his own best interests. To assure Stalinist control over Republican Spain, it was necessary to crush all groups which stood in the way of the Spanish Communist Party. Logically, the Party of Marxist Unification, or POUM, was a dissident communist party, as a dissident communist movement, and as the weakest opponent of Stalinism, was the first target against which the wrath and growing power of the Stalinists was turned. After first getting to the POUM, one second. After first getting the POUM thrown out of the government of Catalonia in December 1936, the Stalinists were able 7 months later to get the party outlawed and its principal leaders arrested. The Wikipedia for POUM says it's the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, was a Spanish communist party formed during the Second Republic and mainly active during the Spanish Civil War. It was formed by the fusion of the Trotskyist communist left of Spain and the Workers' and Peasants' Bloc, BOC, affiliated with the Right Opposition against the will of Leon Trotsky, with whom the former broke. After getting the POUM thrown out of the government of Catalonia in December 1936, the Stalinists were able 7 months later to get the party outlawed and its principal leaders arrested. They murdered Andreu Nin, and only a few months before the end of the Civil War, arranged for what Joaquín has called, quote, the Moscow trial in Barcelona, end quote. This is the drama and the tragedy of the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. Andreu Nin, I typed in Andreas Nin and Andreu Nin came up in Wikipedia, so Andreu Nin was a Spanish politician, trade unionist, and translator. He is mainly known for his role in various Spanish left-wing movements of the early 20th century and later for his role in the Spanish Civil War. Andreu Nin is also known for his work translating Russian classics such as Anna Karenina, Crime and Punishment, and some works by Anton Chekhov from Russian to Catalan. A teacher and journalist during his youth, Andreu Nin was involved in various political movements until he joined the anarchist Confederation Nacional del Trabajo, CNT. During Nin's stay in Russia, he witnessed the Russian Revolution, which marked his conversion to Marxism. After Nin's return to Spain, Andreu Nin later became one of the founders of the small but active Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. Andreu Nin eventually became the leading figure in Spanish revolutionary Marxism. Andreu disappeared during the course of the Spanish Civil War after having been arrested by the Republican authorities following the, quote, May Days. Back to the text. New section. The Party of Marxist, the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification and the Popular Front. Wikipedia says the Popular Front Spain was an electoral alliance and pact formed in January 1936 to contest that year's general election by various left-wing political organizations during the Second Spanish Republic. The alliance was led by Manuel Azaña. In Catalonia and the modern-day Valencian community, the coalition was known as the Front of the Lefts. The Popular Front included the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, PSOE, Communist Party of Spain, PCE, and the Republicans, Republican Left, IR, led by Azaña, and Republican Union, UR, led by Diego Martinez Barrio. This pact was supported by Galician, PG, and Catalan nationalists, ERC, the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, Socialist Union Workers General Union UGT, and the anarchist trade union, the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, CNT. Many anarchists who would later fight alongside Popular Front forces during the Spanish Civil War did not support them in the election, urging abstention instead. The Comintern had decided in 1935 that in response to the growth of fascism, popular fronts allying the communist parties with other anti-fascist parties, including socialist and even bourgeois parties, were advisable. In Spain, it was a coalition between leftist Republicans and workers' organizations to defend social reforms of the first government, 1931 to 1933, of the Second Spanish Republic and liberate the political prisoners, according with the front propaganda held since the Asturian October Revolution of 1934. The Popular Front defeated the National Front, a collection of right-wing parties, and won the 1936 election, forming the new Spanish government. Manuel Azaña was elected president of the Republic in May 1936, but the PSOE did not join the government because of the opposition of Francisco Largo Caballero. On July 1936, conservative/monarchist generals instigated a coup d'etat which started the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939. The government dissolved the Spanish Republican Army in the loyal territories and brought weapons to armed groups organized by the unions, UGT and CNT, and workers' parties, PSOE, PCE, POUM, that had initial success in defeating the Francoist forces in Madrid, Barcelona, Bilbao, and Valencia. In October the same year, the Spanish Republican Army was reorganized. After a protracted war of attrition, General Francisco Franco would defeat the Republican forces and rule Spain as a dictatorship until Franco died in 1975. Back to the text. In principle, the Partido Obrero de Unificación Marxista was opposed to the Popular Front. However, the political forces at work in Spain by the last month of 1935 overcame the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification's natural inclination to oppose an alignment of working-class-based revolutionary parties with the middle-class Republican parties. Soon after the POUM's establishment, the POUM sent a letter to all the country's labor unions and parties urging a meeting, quote, for the process of studying the way to carrying out joint action, end quote. However, the POUM found little receptivity to such a uniting of the various labor groups, most of which did not bother to answer the POUM letter. Meanwhile, since it was clear that the new elections for the Spanish Parliament, Cortes, would soon be held, the Socialist Party had begun conversations with left-wing Republican groups for an electoral alliance. The official communists, in conformity with the new Popular Front line of the Comintern, asked to be included in these negotiations. They were accepted and succeeded in getting the name, quote, Popular Front, end quote, adopted for this alliance, thus leading some observers then and later to conclude mistakenly that the coalition had been organized on their initiative. Aside from the Socialist Party, Communist Party, two left-wing Republican parties, Izquierda Republicana and Unión Republicana, and several Catalan autonomous parties, the Popular Front came to include the Partido Sindicalista, a small group of ex-anarcho-syndicalists headed by Ángel Pestaña. Ángel Pestaña, Wikipedia says, lived from 1886 to 1937 and was a Spanish anarcho-syndicalist general secretary of the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, CNT, founder of the Syndicalist Party, and member of the Cortes Generales. Wikipedia says that the Syndicalist Party was a left-wing political party in Spain formed by Ángel Pestaña in 1932. Pestaña, a leading member of the Confederación Nacional de Trabajo (CNT) trade union, formed the party in response to the growing influence of the Iberian Anarchist Federation over the CNT. Pestaña and other notable members of the CNT had previously signed a Manifest del 30, Manifesto of the 30, which had gotten them expelled. The thesis of Ángel Pestaña was to contribute to the workers' movement by endowing it with a political party which, without interfering in their work, collaborated with the industrial unions but with full autonomy. It differed from the PSOE-UGT pact in that it intended to avoid all subordination of union work to partisan political interests. Pestaña's libertarian possibilist tendencies corresponded with the British Independent Labour Party, a representation of workers' interest in Parliament with a revolutionary purpose, that is, the achievement of libertarian communism with an organization based on the cooperatives, trade unions, and municipalities. So that's Ángel Pestaña. Every leftist group of any significance was part of the coalition, and the Party of Marxist Unification could hardly stay out of it. Therefore, on the 1st of January 1936, the Executive Committee of the POUM wrote the Executive Commission of the PSOE and asked to be accepted as a member of the Popular Front. Although the Communists strongly objected, the Socialists overrode their objection and on January 8, 1936, informed the POUM that it had been accepted. On the 15th of January, Juan Andrade became a member of the leading committee of the Popular Front in Madrid, and Joaquín Maurín became the POUM representative of the Catalan Committee of the Front. Wikipedia just says that Juan Andrade was a Spanish communist journalist, politician, and editor, and that Joaquín Maurín who lived from 1896 to 1973, was a Spanish communist politician, leader of the Workers' and Peasants' Bloc (BOC) and the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification (POUM). Joaquín Maurín was active mainly in Catalonia. party of Marxist unification proposed that it be given Popular Front candidacies in parts of the country where it had some substantial strength. It originally requested 2 candidates in Catalonia, Maurín in Barcelona and Nin in Tarragona. However, they finally had to settle for one, Maurín's candidacy in Barcelona. In addition, the Party of Marxist Unification requested that it be allowed to name Popular Front candidates in Castellón, Valencia, and Badajoz, in all of which the POUM had a substantial organization. They were denied these nominations, but were promised by the Popular Front national leadership that Andreu Nin could be the candidate for Teruel, and Julián Gorkin a nominee from Cadiz. Julián Gorkin lived from 1901 to 1987 and was a Spanish revolutionary socialist writer and central leader of the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, the POUM, during the Spanish Civil War. Julián Gorkin was a writer of many books on political and cultural themes, as well as novels and some plays. After the Spanish Civil War, Julián Gorkin escaped to Mexico, where Julián Gorkin became a part of the strong anti-Stalinist social community there. Julián Gorkin helped obtain visas for Victor Serge and his son Vladi to enter Mexico when they had to escape from the Nazis invading France. By the time Julián Gorkin returned to Paris in 1948, Julián Gorkin had become an anti-communist. From 1953 to 1963, with a brief interlude, Julián Gorkin was editor in Paris of the periodical Cuadernos, published by the CIA front group Congress for Cultural Freedom. Back to the text. But the local parties in those areas where the POUM had virtually no organization refused to accept either Nin or Gorkin. The upshot was that the POUM ended up with Joaquín Maurín as the only candidate on the Popular Front ticket. He was elected. But POUM looked upon the Popular Front as a transitory electoral alliance, unlike the official communists who insisted that the Popular Front should continue in existence as a basis for governing the country. The official communist position won out. The POUM was still committed to the Alianza Obrera. On May 22, 1936, La Batalla published a proposal of the POUM Executive Committee urging that the Alianza Obrera, quote, be reorganized on a new basis, end quote. It said that, let me see if there's actually anything for La Batalla. Okay. Back to the text. It said, although the Alianza, quote, has 3 characteristic steps: A, organism of united front to carry out offensive and defensive actions; B, insurrectional organism; and C, organism of power, it was once again back in the first phase, which might be more or less long, end quote. The POUM urged that, quote, In this stage, the mission of the Alianza Obrera is to emphasize increasingly the unity of the labor movement in all areas and offer battle, politically, socially, and economically against the bourgeoisie and the bourgeois state, with the objective of developing among the working class a combative consciousness and to progressively reduce the positions of its class enemy, the bourgeoisie." End quote. The POUM's call for revigorization of the Alianza Obrera went unheeded. Meanwhile, on the 8th of March 1936, Joaquín Maurín had announced to a meeting of the parliamentary bloc of the Popular Front that the POUM was withdrawing. Quote, he explained that in his opinion, the People's Front had been an election bloc and that as such had lost its significance for the working class after the elections. The majority of the election bloc, he continued, is in favor of parliamentary action only. The main task of the proletariat today, however, is to concentrate on extra-parliamentary activities. It prevented them from doing so by its alliance with the petty bourgeoisie. End quote. New section. Maurín in Parliament. During his 4 months in the Cortes, which is the Spanish Parliament, I guess, Maurín spoke 4 times. Twice Maurín interrogated the government on particular actions. The other times, Maurín made political speeches. On April 15th, on the occasion of the first vote of confidence for the government of Prime Minister Manuel Azaña, Maurín explained that although he was going to vote in favor of the government, Maurín wanted to express objections to the political line Azaña was taking. Wikipedia says, Manuel Azaña lived from 1880 to 1940 and was a Spanish politician who served as Prime Minister of the Second Spanish Republic between 1931 and 1933 and 1936. Organizer of the Popular Front in 1935 and the last President of the Republic, 1936 to 1939, he was the most prominent leader of the Republican cause during the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939. A published author in the 1910s, he stood out in the pro-Allies camp during World War II. Manuel Azaña was sharply critical towards the generation of 98, the reimagination of the Spanish Middle Ages, imperial Spain in the 20th century, yearnings for a Praetorian refurbishment of the country. Azaña followed instead the examples of the French Enlightenment and the Third French Republic and took a political quest for democracy in the 1920s while defending the notion of homeland as the, quote, democratic equality of all citizens towards the law, end quote, that made him embrace republicanism. After the proclamation of the Second Spanish Republic in April 1931, Azaña became Minister of War of the Provisional Government and enacted military reform, looking to develop a modern armed forces with fewer army officers. Azaña later became Prime Minister in October 1931. The Spanish Civil War broke out while Manuel Azaña was President of Spain. With the defeat of the Republic in 1939, Manuel Azaña fled to France, resigned from office, and died in exile only a year later at age 60. Back to the text. Joaquín Maurín did not agree with the Prime Minister that the great need of the moment was to reestablish, quote, calm, end quote, but felt that the major requirement was for the government to carry out the Popular Front electoral promise of punishing those who had perpetrated atrocities against workers during the October 1934 uprising. Wikipedia says, the Revolution of 1934, also known as the Revolution of October 1934, or the Revolutionary General Strike of 1934, was a revolutionary strike movement that took place between the 5th and 19th of October 1934 during the Black Biennium of the Second Spanish Republic. The revolts were triggered by the entry of the conservative Spanish Confederation of the Autonomous Right, CETA, into the Spanish government. Most of the events occurred in Catalonia and Asturias and were supported by many Spanish Socialist Workers' Party and General Union of Workers (UGT) members, notably Largo Caballero, as well as members of the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo (CNT). Historians have argued that the incident sharpened the antagonism between the political right and left in Spain and was part of the reason for the later Spanish Civil War. Around 2,000 people were killed during the uprising, which was repressed by Spanish government forces. Back to the text. Furthermore, quote, there is no question, the alternative is certain. Either socialism will triumph or fascism will triumph. Democracy in the 20th century after the triumph of the Russian Revolution ... is simply a moment of transition between two antagonistic periods. The dilemma is fascism or socialism, end quote. Joaquín, Maurín. On the 16th of June, after Azaña had been elected President of the Republic in place of Niceto Alcala Zamora, deposed by Parliament, there was a new vote of confidence, this time for a cabinet headed by Santiago Casares Quiroga. Wikipedia says, Niceto Alcala Zamora y Torres, who lived from 1877 to 1949, and was a Spanish lawyer and politician who served briefly as the first Prime Minister of the Second Spanish Republic, and then from 1931 to 1936 as its president. Santiago Casares Quiroga, Santiago Casares y Quiroga lived from 1884 to 1950 and was Prime Minister of Spain from the 13th of May to July 1936. Casares Quiroga resigned just 48 hours after the beginning of the military insurrection that led to the Spanish Civil War. Back to the text. Maurín this time attacked the government for not carrying out the Popular Front program and criticized strongly the suspension of constitutional guarantees imposed by the Azaña cabinet. Maurín argued that, quote, there is a pre-fascist situation in the country that is undeniable, end quote. Maurín. The only way to deal with it was for the government, quote, to nationalize the land, the railroads, large industry, the mines, banking, and adopt other progressive measures such as those adopted by Léon Blum in France, end quote. Maurín. Then Maurín warned, quote, if not, within 2 months we shall see the most intense counter-revolution, and perhaps then it will be too late to contain the outrages of fascism, of which there is more danger than perhaps we in these seats understand, end quote. Maurín. Maurín's words proved very prophetic. Maurín's positions did not go unnoticed by the official communists. Victor Alba has noted, I think Victor Alba wrote a big book on the POUM, that, quote, on April 24th, Mundo Obrero, Madrid Communist Daily, denounced the, quote, renegade Maurín, enemy of the Popular Front, end quote, and in the Cortes, Dolores y Baruri, La Pasionaria, attacked Maurín because Maurín had declared to some journalists that the Workers' Party should separate themselves from the Popular Front and form their own front. End quote. Victor Alba. Wikipedia says Victor Alba, also known as Pere Pagès y Eliès, lived from 1916 to 2003 and was a Spanish anti-Stalinist communist politician, journalist, writer, and Spanish university professor. Wikipedia says Dolores Ibarruri lived from 1895 to 1989, was also known as Pasionaria, the quote passionate one, end quote, or quote passion flower, end quote, was a Spanish Republican politician of the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939 and a communist known for a slogan No pasarán, they shall not pass, issued during the Battle for Madrid in November 1936. Ibarruri joined the Spanish Communist Party when it was founded in 1920. In the 1930s, Dolores Ibarruri became a writer for the Communist Party of Spain publication Mundo Obrero, and in February 1936 was elected to the Cortes Generales as a PCE deputy for Asturias. Going into exile from Spain towards the end of the Civil War in 1939, Dolores Ibarruri became General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Spain, a position she held from 1942 to 1960. The party then named Dolores Ibarruri honorary president of the Communist Party of Spain, a post she held for the rest of her life. Upon Dolores Ibarruri's return to Spain in 1977, she was re-elected as a deputy to the Cortes for the same region Ibarruri had represented from 1936 to 1939 under the Second Spanish Republic. New section, POUMistas and the labor movement. With their insistence that the only meaningful alternative in national politics was fascism or socialism, and the urging that the workers take power, it is understandable that the POUMistas were very active in the labor movement in the months preceding the outbreak of the Civil War. They particularly stressed the need for trade union unity, but although some steps were taken to unite the very splintered labor movement, the POUM had no part in these. In May 1936, the CNT, at its Congress in Zaragoza, readmitted the so-called Treintistas, who had withdrawn 3 years earlier because of the domination of the CNT by the Federación Anarquista Ibérica, the FAI. In addition, the Zaragoza Congress took steps to try to develop a closer relationship with the socialist-controlled labor group, Unión General de Trabajadores. However, the unions under control of the POUM were not included in this movement for unity, in spite of the fact that most of them had originally belonged to the CNT. The POUMistas brought together the local federations they controlled in Lerida, Gerona, Tarragona, and a few smaller Catalan towns, and a few unions they dominated in Barcelona, in a convention on May 1st, 1936, to form the Federación Obrera de Unidad Sindical. Andreu Nin was elected its general secretary, and Pere Bonnet, assistant secretary. These were the two in charge of the POUM trade union work. Spanish Wikipedia says Pere Bonnet lived from 1901 to 1980 and was a Spanish trade unionist and politician, a member of the National Confederation of Labor, CNT, the General Union of Workers, UGT, and the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. Back to the text. These were the two in charge of POUM trade union work. Victor Alba has noted that, quote, the FOUS announced from its birth that the FOUS didn't want to be just another small central labor organization, but rather that it proposed to work for unification of the other central labor groups, end quote. The FOUS planned a trade union conference for the fall of 1936, quote, to try to unite the various Catalan central labor groups, and then to bring pressure for the union of the CNT and UGT, to which would be added unions outside of both of them. However, in spite of the wishes of founders of the FOUS, the organization was forced, quote, whether it wished it or not, to behave as a central labor organization and to find itself opposed on various occasions to the CNT, end quote. It led several important strikes in the few weeks before the outbreak of the Civil War, including walkouts of printing trade workers in Barcelona and commercial employees throughout Catalonia. New section. Anti-Stalinist position of the POUM. One second, sorry. The POUM assumed an increasingly anti-Stalinist position in the months preceding the war. Quote, it had lost its illusions about the USSR. Stalin appeared as what he really was in the eyes of the POUMistas. While in Europe, with the tool of the Popular Front, the communists succeeded in getting people to accept almost all their propaganda, for example, the story of the, quote, most democratic constitution of the world, end quote, the Soviet one of 1936, and to forget certain bothersome realities such as the concentration camps, ideological colonialism, the deifying of Stalin, the persecution of all who opposed them. The POUM in Spain began to see things as they really were, to understand that ideological colonialism is not an isolated fact, but a consequence and part of the whole system of falsification of the revolution, end quote. I don't know who that quote is by, but I'm assuming it's Victor Alba. That'll be my guess. Where am I? Felt like I was going to look something up. The 1936 Constitution of the Soviet Union, also known as the Stalin Constitution, was the Constitution of the Soviet Union adopted on the 5th of December 1936. The 1936 Constitution was the second Constitution of the Soviet Union and replaced the 1924 Constitution, with 5th of December being celebrated annually as Soviet Constitution Day from its adoption by the Congress of Soviets. This date was considered the, quote, second foundational moment, end quote, of the USSR after the October Revolution of 1917. The 1936 Constitution redesigned the government of the Soviet Union, expanded all manner of rights and freedoms, and it spelled out a number of democratic procedures. The Congress of Soviets replaced itself with the Supreme Soviet, which amended the 1936 Constitution in 1944. The 1936 Constitution was the longest surviving constitution of the Soviet Union, and many Eastern Bloc countries later adopted constitutions that were closely modeled on it. It was replaced by the 1977 Constitution of the Soviet Union, the Brezhnev Constitution, on the 7th of October 1977. Back to the text. This ideological position was to ensure the POUM persecution by the Stalinists as soon as the latter were in a position to carry out such persecution. New section. Pre-Civil War political situation. In the months between victory of the Popular Front in February 1936 and the outbreak of the Civil War months later, Spain went through a particularly violent period. Victor Alba has noted that, quote, the peasants seized land, the labor organizations became militarized, the demonstrations of the blue-shirted members of the Falange, the light blue-shirted United Socialist Youth, the blue work shirts of the Pumistas passed one another in the streets on Sundays and fought and sometimes shot at each other. In the universities, the Falangista and the leftist elements fought, ... There were constant clashes between workers and police, peasants and civil guards, arrests, deaths, closing of headquarters of rightists and workers, censorship, end quote. Victor Alba. During these months, the government was in the hands of the middle-class Republican parties in spite of the fact that the Popular Front victory of February 1936 had been won principally by the working-class-based parties and the decision of the anarcho-syndicalist workers to vote for left-wing candidates. Outside the government, the labor and radical groups carried on extensive agitation, and the faction of the socialists, led by the veteran trade unionist Francisco Largo Caballero, and the POUM called for a working-class revolution. At the same time, the country's right abandoned any belief in the parliamentary system and political democracy. Civilian politicians and right-wing elements in the military, with the support of most of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, plotted overthrow of the Republic. This plotting culminated in the outbreak of the military uprising, first in Spanish Morocco on July 17th, and then in Spain itself on the following 2 days. Wikipedia says Francisco Largo Caballero lived from 1869 to 1946 and was a Spanish politician and trade unionist who served as the Prime Minister of the Second Spanish Republic during the Spanish Civil War. Francisco Caballero was one of the historic leaders of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, PSOE, and of the Workers' General Union, UGT. Although Francisco Largo Caballero entered into politics as a moderate leftist after the 1933 general election, in which the conservative CEDA party won the majority, Francisco Largo Caballero took a more radical turn and began to advocate for a socialist revolution. Back to the text. Civilian politicians and right-wing elements in this plotting culminated in the outbreak of the military uprising, first in Spanish Morocco on July 17th, and then in Spain itself on the following 2 days. Wikipedia says, for the Spanish coup of July 1936, was a military uprising that intended to overthrow the Spanish Second Republic, but precipitated the Spanish Civil War. Nationalists fought against Republicans for control of Spain. The coup was organized on the 18th of July 1936, although it started the previous day in Spanish Morocco. Instead of resulting in a prompt transfer of power, the coup split control of the Spanish military and territory roughly in half. The resulting civil war ultimately led to the establishment of a nationalist regime under Francisco Franco, who became ruler of Spain as Caudillo. The rising was intended to be swift, but the government retained control of most of the country, including Malaga, Jaén, and Almería. Cadiz was taken by the rebels, and General Gonzalo Queipo de Llano managed to secure Seville. In Madrid, the rebels were hemmed into the Montaña barracks, which fell with much bloodshed. On the 19th of July, the cabinet, headed by the newly appointed Prime Minister, José Giral, ordered the distribution of weapons to the unions. With the defeat of the rebels in Madrid, Barcelona, and Valencia, anarchists took control of large parts of Aragon and Catalonia. The rebel General Guedel surrendered in Barcelona and was later sentenced to death and executed. The rebels secured the support of around half of the Spanish army, which totaled about 66,000 men, including large numbers who were on leave, as well as the 30,000-strong Army of Africa. The Army of Africa was Spain's most professional and capable military force. The government retained less than half of the supply of rifles, high light machine guns, and artillery pieces. Both sides had few tanks and outdated aircrafts, while naval capacity was reasonably even. The defection of many regular officers weakened Republican units of all types. The Revolution in Catalonia. With the news of the military revolt in Morocco, Louis Compagnie president of the regional government of Catalonia, went on the radio to tell the people to be calm and that the situation in Catalonia was well in hand. However, neither the anarcho-syndicalists nor the CNT-FAI nor the POUMistas believed this. Louis Companys lived from 1882 to 1940 and was a Catalan politician who served as president of Catalonia from 1934 during the Spanish Civil War. Companys was a lawyer close to labor movement and one of the most prominent leaders of the Republican left of Catalonia, political party founded in 1931. Companys had a key role in the events of the proclamation and first steps of the Second Spanish Republic. Appointed president of the Generalitat of Catalonia in 1934, after the death of the previous president, Francesc Macià, his government tried to consolidate the recently acquired Catalan self-government and implement a progressive agenda, despite the internal difficulties. In disagreement with the accession of the right-wing party CEDA to the Spanish government in the events of October 6, Luis Companys proclaimed a new Catalan state, for which he was imprisoned between 1934 and 1936. Companys remained the head of the Catalan government during the Spanish Civil War, remaining loyal to the Republican faction. Exiled in France after the war, Luis Companys was captured by the secret police of Nazi Germany, the Gestapo, and handed over to the Spanish state of Francisco Franco, which executed him in 1940. Back to the text. Late in the night of July 18th and early in the morning of July 19th, Josep Coll and Julian Joaquín of the Party of Marxist Unification, or of the POUM, went to ask the Interior Minister of Catalonia that arms be distributed to the workers. Their request was turned down. However, the POUM executive committees remained in permanent session, and the POUMistas issued 3 manifestos. The first, distributed early on the morning of July 19th, called for the revitalization of the Alianza Obrera. The second, by the POUM youth group, the Juventud Comunista Ibérica, called upon soldiers to desert. And third, in the name of the POUM, called the workers of Catalonia out on general strike. Spanish Wikipedia says, the Iberian Communist Youth, JCI, was a Spanish youth organization promoted by the Partido Obrero de Unificación Marxista POUM during the Spanish Republic and the Spanish Civil War. The JCI was born in July 1931 with the name Independent Communist Youth, linked to the Workers' and Peasants' Bloc, a split from the PCE led by Joaquín, Maurín, and opposed to Stalinism. The POUM provided military training to the JCI. Starting in September 1935, after the unification of the communist left of Spain and the BOC that gave birth to the POUM, it became its youth. Its main leaders were Herminal Vidal, first secretary of the JCI and died during the military uprising of July 19, 1936 in Barcelona, and Vilibaldo Solano, who succeeded him as secretary, and Ignacio Iglesias. JCI opposed the entry of the POUM into the government of the Generalitat of Catalonia and formed a revolutionary youth front together with libertarian youth. JCI had a prominent role during the May Days of 1937. It claimed to have 10,000 members. JCI's official organ was the newspaper Juventud Comunista, published in Barcelona. Other organs were Juventud Roja, Valencia, La Antorcha, Madrid, and newspaper Combat, La Rida, and weekly Acción, Tarragona. On the morning of the 19th of July, fighting broke out in Barcelona and other Catalan cities and towns. Although most of the struggle against the rebellion was carried on by the CNT, to which the great majority of the Unionists of Catalonia belonged, the POUM also played an active part. They fought particularly in the Plaza de Catalonia and Plaza Universidad, and in front of the Atarazan army barracks. Germinal Vidal, secretary of the JCI, was killed in the fighting in the Plaza Universidad. One second.
Germinal Vidal. Germinal Vidal.
Germinal. Okay, I thought G's or H's. My Spanish is rusty. Germinal Vidal lived from 1915 to 1936. Was a Spanish communist politician and trade unionist youth leader of the Workers' and Peasants' Bloc and the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. He joined the BOC, the Workers' and Peasants' Bloc, in the beginning of 1931. The son of a working-class family, Germinal Vidal began working as a driver in the port of Barcelona and was soon elected president of the Union. In the same period, Germinal Vidal was also elected member of the Central Committee of the Iberian Communist Youth, JCI. At the Congress held in March 1934, Herminal Vidal was elected General Secretary of the JCI. During this period, ties were strengthened with the Socialist Youth of Spain, and the Workers' Alliance was advocated, having to go underground after the defeat of the October Revolution of 1934. With the founding of the POUM in September 1935, the JCI became its youth organization, creating its own newspaper, Juventud Comunista, and experiencing a strong boom during the first months of 1936. On July 19, 1936, while fighting as a militiaman, Franco's military uprising in Barcelona, died in the Plaza de la Universidad in the capital of Catalonia. He was replaced in the position of General Secretary by Vilibaldo Solano. Back to the text. The cause of the Republic was saved in Catalonia by the workers' organizations, particularly the CNT and the POUM, with some help from the police. Once the fighting was over, 3 anarchist leaders of the CNT conferred with President Companys. He was very frank with the anarchists, admitting that the CNT was responsible for saving the Republic in Catalonia and offered to turn the government over to them. However, they refused his offer, agreeing to allow the middle-class autonomous government to remain in office. Victor Alba has described the paradoxical situation which existed in Catalonia after the suppression of the right-wing military revolt. Quote, in July 1936, there existed in fact a situation which all Marxists considered ideal. There was a working class with class consciousness which wanted power. This is what the Marxists had always dreamed of and that they almost never had achieved. In this situation, which did not exist in Germany in 1919 or France in 1936, where the Marxists were strong, occurred in Catalonia, where Marxism was a minority and was represented exclusively by the POUM, and that this at a moment when the world labor movement was in a crisis and retreat, corrupted by Stalinism and made soft by reformism, and that aroused class, which wanted to govern, was massed in an organization which rejected power, which was afraid of it. End quote. Victor Alba. However, power had to be exercised by someone. It really was in the hands of the working class unions and parties. The middle-class government of Catalonia was in no position to exercise effective control. As a result, on July 21st, the Comité de Milicias was organized, a group destined for several months to be the real government of Catalonia. Spanish Wikipedia says the Central Committee of Anti-Fascist Militias of Catalonia was an administrative and military entity created on July 21, 1936 by the President of the Generalitat of Catalonia, Luis Companys, under pressure exerted by the anarcho-syndicalist union Central National Confederation of Labor and the Iberian Anarchist Federation, that they had capitalized on the workers' struggle in the streets of Barcelona in an attempt to subdue the military rebels against the Second Spanish Republic and in the context of the Spanish Social Revolution of 1936. Back to the text. The Comité de Milicias had as its purported objective the recruiting and organizing of militia groups to go to the front, which had been established in Aragon to the west of Catalonia, to fight the rebel army which held control of half of Aragon and most of the rest of northern Spain. However, in fact, the Comité de Milicias took over most governmental functions in Catalonia. It consisted of representatives of all the trade unions and left parties in Catalonia. The POUM named Josep Rovira as its representative on the Comité de Milicias. Wikipedia says Josep Rovira y Canals lived from 1902 to 1968 and was a Catalan politician, a leader of the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, the POUM. During the Spanish Civil War, Josep Rovira managed to send several militia units to the Aragon front and was arrested by the Republican authorities in the context of the repression against the POUM. Political positions of the POUM after July 19th. Joaquín Maurín was no longer the political leader of the POUM. A day before the military uprising began, Maurín had gone to Galicia to give a speech in Santiago de los Caballeros. On July 19th, Maurín went to the port city of Coruña, where Maurín conferred with the local civil governor. The next day, troops revolted and seized control of the city. Maurín fell prisoner and remained in Franco jails for a decade. For several months, the other POUM leaders thought that Maurín had been killed. Joaquín made the announcement of his death over the radio in Barcelona. With Maurín's disappearance, Andreu Nin was named political secretary of the party and Julián Joaquín its international secretary. Whether the presence of Maurín at the head of the POUM during the first year of the Civil War would have made any difference in the party's policies or in its ultimate fate, it is impossible to say. However, it is certain that in retrospect, Maurín was very critical of certain aspects of the policies the POUM followed. Maurín told the author that though he thought that the POUM had taken a quote, impossibilist, end quote, stance during the war, furthermore, he was critical of a number of its specific actions and policies. Maurín argued that the POUM made a mistake in not entering the Spanish Republican government of Largo Caballero at the time of the entry into it of the Confederación Nacional de Trabajo. He was convinced that if the POUM had wished to enter, Largo Caballero, who was quite friendly to them, would have been glad to have them represented. Maurín added that the POUMistas had not sought to become members of the national Spanish regime because they, quote, didn't consider it important, end quote. He also felt that the POUM had been mistaken in its opposition to transformation of the militia at first organized by the various parties and trade union groups into a regular army. Victor Alba has also shed some light on the question of whether the policy of the POUM changed, at least in degree, with the disappearance of Maurín. He has published a letter of Maurín to Pierre Brouet, Pierre Brouet being an important French Trotskyist. Quote, "In the brief time that Nin and I were together in the leadership of the POUM, there was never any disagreement between us. However, it surprised me in one meeting of the executive committee, when Nin asked me to write an article for Nueva Era, the doctrinal review of the party, of which he was the editor, about what I understood by, quote, democratic socialist revolution, end quote, which had been the basic political basis of the BOC. Such a proposal made me suppose that Nin still fundamentally followed the Trotskyist thesis of, quote, socialist revolution, end quote. It is the thesis which the POUM maintained when I disappeared from the scene, and which, being fundamentally mistaken, contributed to its ruin. On another occasion, after a long interview I had in Madrid with Largo Caballero, in which he expressed to me the feeling of having the POUM merge with the PSOE, when I reported on that interview to the executive committee of the POUM, Nin was one who most strongly opposed the idea of such a fusion. The backing of the POUM would have strengthened the position of Largo Caballero in the face of the Communist Party and the Prieto sector. It is well to remember that the socialist sector, most pro-communist during the Civil War, was anti-caballerista, the one of Prieto Negrin, end quote. Joaquín Maurín. It says that Juan Negrin, who lived from 1892 to 1956, was a Spanish physician and politician who served as Prime Minister of the Second Spanish Republic. Juan Negrin was a leader of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party and of the left-leaning Popular Front government during the Spanish Civil War. Juan Negrin also served as finance minister. Juan Negrin was the last loyalist premier of Spain, 1937 to 1939, leading the Republican forces defeated by the nationalists under the General Francisco Franco. Juan Negrin was president of the Council of Ministers of the Second Spanish Republic and the Spanish Republican government in exile between 1937 and 1945. Juan Negrin died in exile in Paris, France. None of the leaders of the Second Spanish Republic has been vilified as Negrin, not only by Francoist historians but also by important sectors of the exiled Spanish left. The leadership of Juan Negrin's own Socialist Party were among his detractors. The leadership of Juan Negrin's Socialist Party were among Juan Negrin's detractors, including Juan Negrin's friend and fellow socialist leader, Indalecio Prieto. Juan Negrin has been depicted as primarily responsible for losing the Civil War, leading with the dictatorial style, selling Spain out to the Soviets and robbing the Spanish treasury. According to the historian Stanley G. Payne, after the end of the Civil War there was no person more hated than Juan Negrin. More recent scholarship, like the work of Negrin's biographer, Gabriel Jackson, attempted to dispel many of these accusations. According to Jackson, Juan Negrin was a pragmatic social democratic leader who allied with the Soviets to keep the Republican cause alive until the outbreak of a world war, which would grant Republican Spain more allies in Western Europe. The PSOE expelled Juan Negrin in 1946, but he was posthumously rehabilitated in 2008. And Indalecio Prieto Tuero, who lived from 1883 to 1962, was a Spanish politician, a minister, and one of the leading figures of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, PSOE, in the years before and during the Second Spanish Republic. So back to the text. At another point, Victor Alba noted that, quote, Maurín is a strategist, Nin a functionary. In spite of this, Nin succeeded in establishing good contact with the rank and file, but Nin never would succeed in becoming a leader capable of guiding his party, and, he would commit some important errors. The Workers' Party of Marxist Unification would suffer during all the Civil War with the absence of Maurín, end quote. Victor Alba. New section. The revolution in Catalonia and elsewhere. With suppression of the uprising on July 17th to 19th in much of Spain, a social revolution took place in all parts of the country, remaining loyal to the Republic except the Basque provinces, where the socially conservative Basque Nationalist Party was dominant. The revolutionary process was most notable in Catalonia. With very little central direction, the workers took over factories, public utilities, and the railroads. In the countryside, the peasants and agricultural laborers seized the land of large landholders and kept it as private holdings or collectivized it, usually under anarcho-syndicalist influence. At the same time, municipal governments were taken over by the representatives of the local unions and the political parties supporting the Republic. In Catalonia, the regional government assumed power which, according to the Constitution, belonged to the national administration, such as control of the banking system and establishment of a defense ministry. Many decades of Marxist and anarchist propaganda lay behind this revolution. However, it was to an amazing degree spontaneous, with local union party units and groups of workers and peasants. It obtained no national plan. It was in the first few days and weeks largely uncoordinated. It was undoubtedly the most spontaneous movement for social change which has occurred in the 20th century. Victor Alba has commented that, quote, it is necessary to insist on this. The POUM, like all the other workers' organizations, vacillated after July 19th, but the workers didn't vacillate. The executive didn't adopt its own policy, but reflected that which the rank and file of the parties, the local committees, developed spontaneously without waiting for direction from Barcelona. It wasn't Nin, Bonnet, Arcourt, Rovira, etc., who determined the policy of the POUM, but it was the rank and file of POUMistas who, by their behavior, determined the policy of the executive, end quote. Victor Alba. By September 1936, the revolutionary process started to become, quote, institutionalized, and end quote. And in retrospect, one can see that the counter-revolution began. A new cabinet was formed by President Campanis, with representatives of his Escuela Catalana, the CNT, the FAI, the Partido Socialista Unificado de Catalunya, the new official communist party of the region, and the POUM. At the same time, the Consejo de Milicias was phased out, and the Consejo de Economia, set up to coordinate the worker-run industries, was brought under control of the government instead of being virtually autonomous. The process of reversing the revolution went further in October with substitution of municipal councils for the revolutionary local government set up at the beginning of the Civil War. Each party represented in the Catalan government got 3 municipal councillors for every member it had in the regional cabinet, resulting in a loss for the POUM and a substantial gain for the official communists. The culmination of this phase of the Civil War, insofar as Catalonia was concerned, came in November 1936 when the Catalan government was reorganized once again. This change was notable not only for the ousting of the POUM, but also for a reduction of the influence of the CNT. New section. The POUM in the revolutionary process. The POUM took an active part in the revolution in Catalonia and in some other loyalist areas. The POUM were represented in the new municipal authorities. Victor Alba has noted that, quote, in some places where the POUM was strong, and this is where it gets tricky because there's a missing page. Yeah, right now I'm on page 215. I should be getting to 216, but the next page says 218. But I think 217 is the next page. I'm going to scroll down a couple pages, see if there's a 216 anywhere. It doesn't look like it. So you're going to have to miss a page, kids. So if that's annoying, you're as annoyed as I am. But that's what happens when you get PDFs off the internet. Where am I? Okay. 217. So I skipped a page. POUMistas also exercised considerable influence in non-governmental organizations during this early period of the Civil War. Members of the party were among the leaders of the cooperative movement as well as of the Unified School Committee established to reorganize the educational system. Wikipedia says the new Unified School Council was an education institution that was created on the 27th of July 1936 in Barcelona. A new school was created to be free, secular, co-educational in Catalan and based on libertarian principles. The new school regime was inspired by the rationalist principles of work, ensuring that all workers could arrive from the primary school to the studies superiors according to its capacity. The purpose of the decree was to coordinate education and to organize suitable buildings. It was a considerable challenge when in 1930 there were 3,049 schools in all of Catalonia, and it took almost twice as many, 5,641, to be able to meet the needs of literacy and basic education. The situation was comparable to the Balearic Islands. 248 schools to build, and the Valencian country, 2,450 schools to build. The pedagogical purpose was to promulgate to all a basic and solid culture that makes them men, developed in all the aspects, able to contribute concrete activities to the benefit of the same individuals and society generally. The libertarian pedagogue and anarchist Juan Puig y Elias, who lived from 1898 to 1972, was the initiator of the CNU, continuing the work of Francesc Ferrer y Guardia. He studied teaching at the Escola Normal de Barcelona and obtained the title of teacher in 1919. His pedagogy put the child at the center of education. He educated not only reason, but also feelings, with constant contact with nature. Affiliated to the CNT from his youth, from 1932 he chaired the section of teachers of the Union of Intellectuals and Liberal Professionals of Barcelona. In July 1936 he held the presidency of the Council of the New Unified School, CENU. The institution was dissolved in February 1939 by the Francoist dictatorship. Back to the text. The members of the POUM increased substantially during the first months of the Civil War. Shortly before the outbreak of the conflict, the party had about 9,000 members. By October 1936, it had put 40,000 members, which compared with 42,000 in the PSUC and 200 areas for the official Communist Party elsewhere in the Republican area. Like all other parties and labor groups supporting the Republic, the POUM in Catalonia and elsewhere seized control of many buildings with the outbreak of the Civil War. In Barcelona, they took over the printing press of a Carlist daily, El Correo Catalán, in order to print La Batalla, which now became a daily. A building belonged to J. Bertrand Musitu. He became head of espionage for Franco, was converted by the POUM into the Maurín Sanatorium. Wikipedia says, José Bertrand y Musitu lived from 1875 to 1957 and was a Spanish lawyer and politician, minister of grace and justice during the reign of Alfonso XIII. Leader of the Regionalist League, he was a deputy to the Cortes and undersecretary of the Treasury in the ministry of Francisco Cambó. During the Civil War, he supported the rebel side and served as a spy in the south of France for the Franco dictatorship. It is estimated that his reports facilitated numerous bombings, sabotages, and acts of terrorism. That's from Spanish Wikipedia. The palace of the Viceroy's wife was used to install a library in the center of Marxist studies. The party's headquarters set up in the former office of the Banco de Galicia. Outside Catalonia, where most of the strength was concentrated, the POUM played a less important role. However, it was represented in the Council of Asturias, which ran the northwest part of Loyalist Spain. In Valencia, a popular executive committee which ran the region until the transfer of the Spanish government there from Madrid in November 1936 had 11 parties and union groups represented in it. The POUM, the CNT, the FAI, Valencia Left Party, Syndicalist Party, Union Republicana consisted of a left bloc in the committee, while in its right wing there were the official Communist, Socialist, Left Republicans, Valencia Nationalist Party, and the UGT. New section. The POUM and the government of Catalonia. Andreu Nin was Minister of Justice of Catalonia for about 3 months. Andreu Nin substantially reorganized and institutionalized the, quote, popular tribunals, end quote, set up at the beginning of the Civil War, established a judicial body to review death sentences and propose commutations to the president of the Catalonia, lowered the legal age of maturity to 18, established very simple adoption procedures, and legalized weddings performed by militia officers. However, Nin was a member of the minority on many issues. He lost a move to establish a bank to finance the worker-controlled industries, and Nin and the CNT representatives had to threaten to resign to prevent adoption of a decree to have the state take over the firms which workers had seized and to compensate the former owners. Often Andreu Nin, as POUM representative, was allied with the 3 CNT ministers, but they were overruled by the middle-class party UGT and PSUC representatives. The POUM accepted a number of measures of the Catalan government to which there were certainly objections within the party. Nin agreed to dissolution of the revolutionary municipal governments established in July. The international publication of the POUM, La Révolution Espagnole, explained that, quote, obviously, one can lament the suppression of the revolutionary initiative of the committees, but the need for codifying different municipal organizations must be recognized, end quote. New section. POUM in the military. Like all other parties and labor groups during the Loyalist cause, the POUM organized its own, quote, columns, end quote, of militiamen to confront the old army risen in rebellion. Departure of the first POUM column from the front, facing Saragossa, was announced on July 23rd. On the next day, another POUM militia unit of 1,500 men went to the front, and a third one left on July 27th. All these were Catalan columns, but on July 28th, the POUM column left Castellón for the Teruel front. Two periodicals for POUM militiamen, Combat in Lerida and Front in Terrassa, were established. Most POUM troops went to the Aragon front, although some 300 of the POUM militia participated, along with CNT soldiers and 2,000 from the Catalan nationalist Estat Català party. In the unsuccessful attempt to take the Balearic island of Mallorca. Within a few weeks, and considerably before organization of the famous international brigades, the POUM had several hundred foreign volunteers in their military units. For the most part, these were members of parties belonging to the London Bureau. They were formed into a, quote, shock battalion, end quote, named after Lenin. There were particularly large numbers of Germans and Italians in its ranks. Its most famous member was the British writer George Orwell. Within a few months, the move was begun to form the militia, quote, columns into regular army units. The units organized by the parties and labor groups were reorganized into, quote, divisions, those under POUM control constituting the 29th Division, together with the CNT's 25 and 26th Division, and the PSUC's 27th Division. They manned the Aragon front. The constant complaint of POUM and CNT division on the Aragon front was that they were being deprived of adequate arms and munitions. George Orwell, who for many months served in the 29th Division, has borne out this complaint. In his book on his experiences in Loyalist Spain, he wrote of, quote, the complete lack of war materials of every description. It needs an effort to realize how badly the militia were armed at this time. Any public school OTC in England is far more like a modern army than we were, end quote. If one keeps in mind that Orwell was on the Aragon front with the POUM troops until the end of April 1937, many months after Soviet arms had begun to arrive in Republican Spain in considerable quantities. The complaints of the POUMistas and anarchist syndicalists that they were purposely being deprived of these arms is borne out. Orwell again explains the logic of this deprivation, quote, in order to check every revolutionary tendency and make the war as much like an ordinary war as possible, it became necessary to throw away the strategic opportunities that actually existed, ... There is very little doubt that arms were deliberately withheld lest too many of them should get into the hands of the anarchists, who would afterwards use them for a revolutionary purpose. Consequently, the Big Aragon offensive, which would have made Franco draw back from Bilbao and possibly from Madrid, never happened, end quote. George Orwell. New section. POUM, loss of trade union strength. Between the outbreak of the Civil War and the end of 1936, the POUM lost most of its trade union influence due to the position adopted by the CNT. The CNT leaders and their anarchist mentors in the Federación Anarquista Ibérica insisted on continuing to see the basic rivalry in the Catalan labor movement as being between the, quote, libertarians were anarcho-syndicalists and the, quote, Marxists, and they made little or no distinction between Marxists of the POUM and supposed Marxists of the PSUC. The CNT-FAI did not recognize that the real division in this period was between those who wanted to maintain and extend the social revolution which had taken place with the outbreak of the Civil War, the CNT-FAI and the POUM, and those who wanted to roll back these changes, the PSUC, UGT, and middle-class Catalan autonomists. Even less did they understand the drive of the communists, including the PSUC, to gain absolute control of Republican Spain. On the 30th of July, the Federación Obrera de Unidad Sindical, the POUM-controlled trade union confederation in Catalonia, issued a call for unification of the labor movement in the region to defend the revolution. They promised to take the lead in trying to achieve this. In the months that followed, the trade union situation in Catalonia changed markedly. The UGT in pre-Civil War Catalonia had been only a handful of members, and the labor movement of Barcelona had been completely dominated by the CNT, while in provincial cities the FOUS was much more important than the UGT. However, the balance of forces changed swiftly after July 19th. The UGT grew suddenly, gaining most of its new members not from traditional organized workers, but from middle-class people. After July 19th, there was a premium on being a member of a union. Even the middle class wanted such affiliation. So large numbers of white-collar workers and even small businessmen flocked to the UGT because of the fear of the revolutionary proclivities of the CNT. The UGT was under control of the Partido Socialista Unificado de Catalunya, formed a few days after outbreak of the Civil War, without any conventions to decide on the matter. By merging of the Socialist Party's Catalan Federation, the regional organization of the Spanish Communist Party, the Movimiento Socialista de Catalunya, and the Partido Proletario Catalán. It joined the Comintern, and in practice was the Catalan branch of the Spanish Communist Party. The anarcho-syndicalists from the beginning of the Civil War insisted on giving virtual equal representation to the UGT in revolutionary organizations, even when the UGT was very small, and subsequently when it became more representative of the bourgeoisie than of the working class. They gave no such recognition to the FOUS. They were undoubtedly influenced by the fact that in Spain as a whole the labor movement was about equally divided between the CNT and the UGT. The CNT supported a decree of the Catalan government on August 10th, which provided for compulsory unionization. The next day, the CNT and UGT formed a liaison committee, leaving out the FOUS. The FOUS was therefore forced to choose between joining the UGT or the CNT. The latter would not accept the FOUS unions on the grounds that they were, quote, Marxist, end quote, in spite of the fact that most of them had originally been members of the CNT. Thus, the FOUS was forced to join forces with the UGT, which rejected the idea of a formal merger of the two groups, fearful that the FOUS, which was of equal numerical strength with it, would dominate the unified group. As a result, the FOUS ordered its members to join the UGT, which accepted them individually. Within a very short time, the PSUC-dominated Catalan UGT leadership to resolve the dilemma presented by the regional organization being controlled by the PSUC, while many of its affiliated organizations were under POUM influence, by removing the POUMista leaders from the local unions. The POUM thus lost its trade union base by the end of 1936. The same thing happened in the rural areas, where peasant groups controlled by the POUM joined with those of the PSUG to form a Union de Sindicatos Campesinos, which joined the UGT. POUMistas were soon removed by the PSUC heads of the UGT from all posts of importance in the peasant organizations. New section. The Communist Drive to Power. During the first 2 or 3 months of the war, the official communists were still a relatively weak force within Republican politics, particularly in Catalonia, where CNT influence was overwhelming. Furthermore, the Soviet Union was cooperating in the face of, quote, non-intervention, end quote, in which all the big powers were engaged and sent little if any armaments to the loyalists. Furthermore, the Soviet Union was cooperating in the farce of, quote, non-intervention, end quote, in which all the big powers were engaged and sent little, if any, armaments to the loyalists. However, by October, the situation had begun to change fundamentally. On the one hand, the PSUC in Catalonia and the official Communist Party and the rest of Republican Spain had become the principal refuges of middle-class people fearful of the revolutionary turn and events after July 18th to 19th, and had vastly increased their membership. The Partido Comunista was said to have risen from 10,000 members to some 200,000 within a matter of weeks. On the one hand, Stalin had changed his tactics. General W.G. Krivitsky, then director of Soviet military intelligence in Western Europe, reported several years later on a meeting of the Politburo at which Stalin announced that the USSR was ready to extend aid to the Spanish Republic. Wikipedia says Walter Germanovich Krivitsky lived from 1899 to 1941 and was a Soviet military intelligence spy master who defected to the West and revealed plans for the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Doesn't sound like he's a general. Didn't say general, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Did say he was a spy in Western Europe for the USSR. Krivitsky noted that, quote, Stalin was of the opinion that it would be possible to create in Spain a regime controlled by Moscow, end quote. Krivitsky also reported on a meeting in the Lubyanka prison on September 14th, presided over by Yagoda, then head of the NKVD. Secret police, and including the head of the Army General Staff, the commander of the military forces of the NKVD, and Slutsky, head of the foreign division of the NKVD. Krivitsky noted, quote, this conference of Lubyanka also put the Soviet secret police in command of the operation of the Comintern in Spain. It decided to coordinate and harmonize the activities of the Spanish Communist parties with the Cheka, end quote. Krivitsky. Wikipedia says Genrikh Yagoda lived from 1891 to 1938 and was a Soviet secret police official who served as director of the NKVD, the Soviet Union Security and Intelligence Agency, from 1934 to 1936. Appointed by Joseph Stalin, Yagoda supervised the arrest, show trials, and execution of the old Bolsheviks Lev Kamenev and Grigory Zinoviev, climatic events of the Great Purge. Yagoda also supervised construction of the White Sea-Baltic Canal with Naftali Franco using penal labor from the Gulag system, during which 12,000 to 25,000 laborers died. Like many Soviet NKVD officers who conducted a political repression, Yagoda himself ultimately became a victim of the purge. Yagoda was demoted from the directorship of NKVD in favor of Nikolai Bukharin in 1936 and arrested in 1937. Charged with crimes of wrecking, espionage, Trotskyism, and conspiracy, Yagoda was a defendant at the trial of the 21, the last of the major Soviet show trials of the 1930s. Following his confession at the trial, Yagoda was found guilty and shot. Abram Slutsky, who lived from 1898 to 1938, was a Soviet intelligence officer who headed the Soviet Foreign Intelligence Service, INO, then part of the NKVD, from May 1935 to February 1938, when he was allegedly poisoned. The INO the title of first main directorate, or the first chief directive of the Committee for the Security under the USSR Council of Ministers, PGU-KGB, was the organization responsible for foreign operations and intelligence activities by providing for the training and management of covert agents, intelligence collection administration, and the acquisition of foreign and domestic political, scientific, and technical intelligence for the Soviet Union. The first chief directorate was formed within the KGB Directorate in 1954 after the collapse of the Soviet Union became the Foreign Intelligence Service, SVRRF. The primary foreign intelligence service in Russia and the Soviet Union has been the GRU, a military intelligence organization and special operations force. Back to the text. After receiving the gold reserves of the Republicans as prepayment, Stalin finally agreed to provide the Loyalists with arms. At the same time, Stalin dispatched to Spain a vast panoply of Soviet and foreign communist agents of all sorts, including advisors of the Spanish Communist Party and PSUC, a wide range of military men, and most important of all, a small legion of NKVD officials. The stage was set for the drama which was to be played out during the remainder of the Spanish Civil War. In return for relatively limited quantities of arms already paid for with the Republic's gold, Stalin demanded the widest range of concessions. These included the right to cancel military offensives agreed upon by the Spanish military and political authorities, freedom for the Soviet NKVD to operate freely behind the Republican lines, arresting, torturing, and killing whomever it chose, and elimination of any individuals or groups which stood in the way of local communist control of the Spanish Republic. These political purges included, first, the removal of the POUM from the Catalan government. Then, 6 months later, its outlawing and arrest of its leaders, elimination of Francisco Largo Caballero as prime minister, and subsequent persecution of the part of the Socialist Party still loyal to Francisco Largo Caballero, elimination early in 1938 of socialist leader Indalecio Prieto as Minister of War, and finally, a few weeks before the end of the war, attempted removal of virtually all remaining military commanders not subject to Communist Party discipline, a move which brought about deposition of the government of the Communist pliable tool, Dr. Juan Negrin, and presaged the final surrender of the Republican forces in Madrid and Levante region. George Orwell, in Homage to Catalonia, first published within months of the end of the Spanish Civil War, was one of the first to spell out the process we have described. He wrote, "The Russians were in a position to dictate, quote, the Russians were in a position to dictate terms. There is very little doubt that these terms were in substance, quote, prevent the revolution or you get no weapons, end quote. And the first move against the revolutionary elements, the expulsion of the POUM from the Catalan Generalite, was done under orders from the USSR. It has been denied that any direct pressure was exerted by the Russian government, but the point is not of great importance, for the communist parties of all countries can be taken as carrying out Russian policy, and it is not denied that the Communist Party was the chief mover, first against the POUM, later against the anarchists and against Caballero's section of the socialists, and in general against a revolutionary policy. Once the USSR had intervened, the triumph of the Communist Party was assured." Second. I need to copy this down. I'm in this reading group right now, and we're reading about we're reading Homage to Catalonia, and what was I gonna say? We're reading Homage to Catalonia, but I've already read Homage to Catalonia, so I'm reading this as part of that. New section. Beginning of the communist attack on the POUM. The POUM, as the weakest anti-Stalinist group in loyalist Spain, was understandably the first victim of the Stalinist drive towards absolute power. It stood largely alone, had a limited popular base, and would be relatively easy to destroy. Furthermore, the campaign against it would serve both to disorient the larger and more important enemies, the CNT and the Socialists, and to make familiar certain arguments which would be useful later against the anarcho-syndicalists and all socialists not willing to submit to communist control. That those opposed to the communists were to be equated with the fascists fighting on the other side in the Civil War, and that the criticism of Stalin regime in the Soviet Union was equivalent to treason to the Spanish Republic. The struggle between official communists and the POUM began almost as soon as the fighting of July 19th was over. On July 20th, President Luis Companys invited the POUM to become part of the Catalan Popular Front. However, 2 days later, the PSUC leader, Juan Comorera, who reportedly was already being advised by the Comintern agent, Erno Guerro, insisted that the POUM not be admitted unless it, quote, declared that it would adhere to the discipline, end quote, of the Popular Front. The POUM executive replied by saying that, quote, we are disposed to establish contact in moments of danger. However, we do not believe that these contacts should be converted into a permanent organic union. And even less can we accept that the committee be converted into a group of parties which destroys the indispensable independence of the political organizations, thus being converted itself into a de facto party, end quote. Okay, so Juan Comorera lived from 1894 to 1958 and was a Spanish communist politician, journalist, and writer from Catalonia who spent several years in Argentina before returning to Spain in 1931 at the start of the Second Spanish Republic. He was a Catalan nationalist and was elected chairman of the Socialist Union of Catalonia in 1933. In 1936, he became Secretary General of the Unified Socialist Party of Catalonia, PSUC, in alliance with the Spanish Communist Party. During the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939, Juan Comorera built up his party into a major political force during the struggles among the supporters of the Republic between socialists, Stalinists, Trotskyists, and anarcho-syndicalists. After the Republicans were defeated by the right-wing forces led by Francisco Franco, Juan Comorera went into exile, living in Mexico and then in France. In 1949, Juan Comorera was expelled from the Communist Party for his Catalan nationalism and survived an assassination attempt. In 1951, Juan Comorera moved back to Catalonia using a false name. He was arrested in 1954 and died in prison 4 years later. Back to the text. The POUM executive replied by saying that, quote, we are disposed to establish contact in moments of danger. However, we do not believe that these contacts should be converted into a permanent organic union. Even less can we accept that the committee be converted into a group of parties which destroys the indispensable independence of the political organizations, thus being converted itself into a de facto party, end quote. At the end of September, the first Soviet consul in Barcelona, V.A. Antonovsenko, arrived. Wikipedia says Vladimir Alexandrovich Antonov-Ovsenko, real name, partly was a prominent Bolshevik leader, Soviet statesman, military commander, and diplomat. At the official reception by the Catalan government, Andreu, the only one who knew Russian, delivered a short message of welcome, but, quote, Antonov acted as if he had never known him, end quote, in spite of the fact that they had worked together for years in Moscow and had been early partisans of Trotsky. Victor Alba cited a letter from CNT leader Diego Abad de Santillan, saying that when a few days later the new consul visited the CNT, quote, I remember that poor Antonov began his relationship with us by saying that Stalin was exceedingly unhappy at the presence of Nin in the Generalidad, end quote. Wikipedia says, Diego Abad de Santillan, who lived from 1897 to 1983, commonly known by the pseudonym Diego Abad de Santillan, was a Spanish-Argentine anarchist syndicalist economist. Born in Lyon, his family moved to Argentina when he was young. There, Diego Abad de Santillan returned to Spain for his higher education and became involved in the Spanish anarchist movement. After Diego Abad de Santillan's studies, Diego Abad de Santillan went back to Argentina and became involved in the Argentine Regional Workers' Federation, FORA, co-founding the International Workers Association, IWA. Following the 1930 Argentine coup d'etat and the establishment of the Second Spanish Republic, Diego Abad de Santillan again went to Spain, becoming involved in the Iberian Anarchist Federation, the FAI. During the Spanish Civil War, Diego Abad de Santillan served in the Catalan government as Minister of Economy. After the war, Diego Abad de Santillan returned to Argentina and largely ceased political activities, going back to Spain only after the Spanish transition to democracy. Back to the text. Abad de Santillan added, quote, that was enough for us to express in every way our friendship for him, Nin, end quote. Shortly afterward, Antonov spoke to the revolutionary Catalan chief of police, the CNTer, Aurelio Fernandez, of the, quote, danger, end quote, of the POUM. After reviewing the attitude of each political group in Catalonia toward the USSR, Antonov insisted that, quote, we have here a dangerous enemy, the POUM, end quote. When he asked Fernandez what he thought of the POUM, the reply was that he regarded the POUMistas as, quote, sincere and firm revolutionaries, end quote. But Antonov Ovsenko insisted that, quote, they are our worst enemies, we shall treat them as such, end quote. Meanwhile, the POUM leaders had expressed themselves strongly on an issue certain to antagonize both Soviet and Spanish communists, the first Moscow trial of Zinoviev and Kamenev. When their execution was announced, La Batalla published an editorial which said, quote, we are revolutionary socialists, Marxists. To call ourselves communists at a moment when in the name of communism, communists were being assassinated would confuse people. In the name of socialism and of the revolutionary working class, we protest against the monstrous crime which has just been perpetrated in Moscow. End quote. Victor Alba has noted that, quote, no one in the ranks of the POUM disagreed with the position it took on the question. The POUMista press would continue denouncing the other Moscow trials. Only when the official party and the PSUC began the open offensive against the POUM, some POUMistas would say in private that perhaps the posture of the party with regard to the Moscow trials was not very diplomatic, end quote. Another position of the POUM particularly enraged the Stalinists. Early in November, Andreu proposed that the POUM executive suggest to President Kampanis that he give refuge to Leon Trotsky, who under Soviet pressure was being forced to leave Norway. The executive agreed reluctantly, and Nin presented the idea to the Catalan cabinet. Comorera of the PSUC strongly objected, while the other members postponed consideration, thus effectively throttling the idea. Victor Alba has commented that, quote, It was not this suggestion of the POUM, obviously, which made the communists take the offensive, but it gave them a good jumping-off place from which to launch what they had been preparing for some time." End quote. Victor Alba. Meanwhile, the war front reached Madrid, and the Republican government fled to Valencia. Julian Joaquín and Juan Andrade went to Madrid to negotiate the entry of the POUM into the Junta de Defensa, established to carry on the struggle there. Before leaving Valencia, they got the approval of the Socialist and CNT members of Largo Caballero's government, and in Madrid, the local socialist and anarchist leaders approved participation of the POUM in the junta. However, it was vetoed by the Soviet embassy, a fact communicated to Enrique Rodriguez of the Madrid POUM by Manuel Albar of the Socialist Party, who wrote, quote, "Ambassador Rosenberg vetoed your presence. It is unjust, undoubtedly, but we understand. The USSR is powerful, and between denying ourselves the support of the USSR or the support of the POUM, there is no doubt possible." Yeah, I'm not saying anything for either of those individuals, so hang on. New section. Ouster of POUM from Catalan government. Soviet representatives brought intense pressure on the Spanish and Catalan governments to remove the POUM from the Catalan regime, which resulted in its ultimate destruction. Some days after the arrival of the first Soviet arms, late in October 1936, Jesus Hernandez, one of two communist ministers in the Largo Caballero government, was summoned to the Soviet embassy, where he was introduced to Slutsky, chief of the foreign division of the NKVD. Wikipedia says that Jesus Hernandez Tomas lived from 1907 to 1971 and was a Spanish communist leader. During the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, he was Minister of Education and Fine Arts, then Minister of Education and Health. After the war, he went into exile in Oran, Moscow, and then Mexico. Jesus Hernandez Tomas was expelled from the party in 1944 for disloyalty to the leadership and purged from the official history of the party after writing a book in 1953 critical of the Stalinist role in the Civil War. Slutsky, back to the text. Slutsky sought to impress upon Hernandez the need to eliminate the POUM. Although Hernandez later claimed that he laughed at Slutsky's insistence that the POUMistas were fascists and in contact with Franco's Falange, he agreed that when the NKVD presented him the evidence that Slutsky claimed that they had against the POUM, he would raise the issue within the cabinet. Slutsky told him that the NKVD had been urging Largo Caballero to outlaw the POUM, but that Largo Caballero was strongly resisting the idea. Although it was too early to move for total elimination of the POUM, the time had come for the last weeks of 1936 for the communists to obtain its removal from the Catalan government. The initiative came from the PSUC and particularly Juan Comorera. He had several conferences with President Companys in early November, and on November 9th, Companys announced the need for a, quote, strong government with full powers which imposes its authority, end quote. Nevertheless, another month was to pass before a full-fledged cabinet crisis developed. The major resistance to the expulsion of the POUM came from the CNT, and the Esquerra was also willing to resist as long as the CNT did. However, the CNTers finally gave in on the issue, feeling that they had that was the price necessary for continuing Soviet aid. On December 12th, Companys and Prime Minister Josep Tarradellas dined with Soviet Consul Antonov Ovsenko. Wikipedia says Josep Tarradellas, first Marquess of Tarradellas, was a Catalonian politician known for his role as the first president of the government of Catalonia, Generalitat de Catalunya. After its re-establishment in 1977 under the French Constitution and the end of the Francoist dictatorship, he was appointed the role of 125th President of Catalonia in 1954, but spent 23 years in exile until 1977 when he is officially recognized as the President of Catalonia by the Spanish government. So back to the text. On the 27th of December 12th, Companys and Prime Minister Josep Tarradellas dined with Soviet Ambassador Antonov Ovsenko. Upon leaving, Tarradellas told waiting journalists, quote, "It is useless to deny that a political problem has been raised," end quote. On December 13th, the CNT newspaper Solidaridad Obrera accused the communists of provoking a crisis and urged that all political groups be kept in the regional government. However, that same day, the cabinet, quote, resigned, end quote, and a new one was reformed immediately without the POUM. The real meaning of what had occurred was clear to the POUM. The Battaglia commented that, quote, the rupture of the government could not be avoided because of the intransigence of the PSUC, which is not content with just asking our elimination, but wants the pure and simple annulment of all the revolutionary conquests of the working class, something which we would never permit, end quote. On the day following the cabinet change, Comorera, when asked the cause for insistence by the PSUC on elimination of the POUM, answered, quote, the unspeakable anti-Soviet campaign of the POUM to combat the USSR at this time is to commit treason, and we are against traitors, end quote. 3 days after the Catalan cabinet change, Moscow's Pravda, in commenting on it, was even more revealing. Quote, in Catalonia has begun the elimination of the Trotskyites and anarchist syndicalists. It will be carried out to its conclusion with the same energy with which it has been done in the USSR. Sorry, 1 second. Back to the text. New section. Communist attack intensified December 1936 to May 1937. Between exit of the POUM from the Catalan government and outbreak of the so-called May events in Barcelona, the official communist vilification and calls for extermination of the POUM reached hysterical levels. Communist efforts to get control of all reins of power in Catalonia and to bring down the national government of Largo Caballero were intensified. Meanwhile, the POUM sought alliance with the CNT and tried to get it to see that the attacks on the POUM was but this prelude to an offensive against the CNT-FAI. Usually, the official communists were referred to the POUMistas as, quote, Trotskyites, end quote, although they were certainly aware that they were not. Santiago Carrillo, head of the Comintern-affiliated United Socialist Youth, who a couple of years before had sought to get Maurín and his followers to join the Socialist Party, in a speech on December 16, 1936, claimed that, quote, the enemies of unity are the Trotskyite elements, ... After the union of the Socialist Youth with the communists, they created the Juventud Comunista Ibérica, which, maneuvering with the name of Lenin and the Russian Revolution, attempts to mislead the youth, end quote. Santiago Carrillo. Wikipedia says, Santiago José Carrillo Solares, who lived from 1915 to 2012, was a Spanish politician who served as General Secretary of the Communist Party of Spain from 1960 to 1982. During the Civil War, he was placed at the head of a Republican militia and was in charge of maintaining public order in Madrid. Some hold him responsible for the massacres of Franco's prisoners that took place at the end of 1936. He was exiled during the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, becoming a leader of the democratic opposition to the regime. His role as leader of the PCE would later make him a key figure in the transition to democracy. Santiago Carrillo later embraced Eurocommunism and democratic socialism and was a member of the Congress of Deputies from 1977 to 1936. Back to the text. Santiago Carrillo added that, quote, what has been made clear is that when the Trotskyites combat the JSU, Juventud Socialista Unificado, the Communist Party, the Popular Front, the unity of the anti-fascist popular masses, in reality they are playing the sad role of agents of international fascism, end quote. Santiago Carrillo. 3 months later, José Díaz, Secretary General of the Spanish Communist Party, reported to a party plenum that, quote, it is necessary to struggle to do away with the tolerance and lack of vigilance of certain proletarian organizations which establish links with counter-revolutionary Trotskyism, with the POUM, considering it as a faction of the labor movement, end quote. He went on to say that, quote, Trotskyism, national and international, with whatever camouflage it covers itself, has been revealed as a counter-revolutionary terrorist organization in the service of international fascism, end quote. Wikipedia says José Díaz, who lived from 1895 to 1942, was a Spanish trade unionist and communist politician. He was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Spain during the Spanish Civil War. However, all the attacks on the POUM in this period were not verbal. In March, La Batalla was suppressed for 4 days, quote, for not having observed the norms of the censorship, end quote. Victor Alba has noted that, quote, all of the POUMista press outside of Catalonia, El Comunista of Valencia, is the only periodical which could publish Juventud Roja, organ of the JCI of Valencia, was suspended because the censor left it practically in blank, end quote. Even in the military field, the official communists sabotaged the POUMistas. Victor Alba has written that, quote, on February 23rd, there was an operation ordered from Barbastro of the 29th Division of the POUM against Vivel del Rio, which the forces of the PSUC, 27th Division, should support from the flanks, but it didn't give this support, making the plan fail, end quote. The communists used every setback they were able to inflict on the POUM as, quote, proof, end quote, of their charges that it was, quote, fascist, end quote. For instance, quote, when the junta of Madrid suppressed the POUMista press of the capital through communist pressure, which in Madrid was irresistible, the communist periodicals said that the decision of the junta demonstrated that the POUM was fascist, since if this were not so, how could one imagine that its periodicals would be suspended, end quote. The POUM held two plenums of its Central Committee during this period, one in December, the other at the end of March. Those reiterated the POUM position that the way to win the war was to go forward with the revolution, which was what inspired the workers to fight. Victor Alba has noted that by March, this thesis was dubious. Quote, in the rest of the Republican zone outside of Catalonia, it is very possible that the revolutionary forces were a minority, and ... Even in Catalonia, who knows whether now, the enthusiasm of the 19th of July having passed, the majority wanted revolution, end quote. Victor Alba. The POUM sought a closer alignment with the CNT, still the largest labor and political group in Catalonia. Its success was limited in part because of the POUM's constant reiteration of its Marxist antecedents and beliefs. Only the POUM youth group was able to form a united front with the CNT's Juventudes Libertarias and some smaller groups. However, although the anarcho-syndicalists did not accept overtures for an alliance with the POUM, they did resist demands for its suppression. Diego Abad de Santillan has described this resistance to communist pressure while accepting the Stalinist appellation of, quote, Trotskyites, end quote, for the POUM, after noting that, quote, the Russian representatives, ... asked of us the extermination of the Partido Obrero de Unificación Marxista, end quote. He commented that, quote, we, who have no interest in transplanting to Spain a fratricidal war without any other objective than personal domination, we who have accepted and sponsored the collaboration of all the forces of anti-fascism, whatever their size, and who have lived and collaborated with the representatives of Trotskyism in the same way as those of Stalinism, we would not accept this reiterated desire, no matter how precious the aid of Russia was in moments through which we were passing. In this, we were not defending a party with which, aside from general collaboration, we have had no links. But as we respect one of the communist tendencies, so we respect the other, and having been able easily to have dispensed with both, we had accepted them in the center of anti-fascist action, end quote. New section. Antecedents of the May events. The drive Pravda had announced in December to eliminate not only the POUM but also the anarcho-syndicalists in Catalonia went forward apace during the first half of 1937. It was marked by action as well as propaganda and generated much rank-and-file resistance from the CNT and less from the anarcho-syndicalist leadership. It culminated in the May events. The German anarchist writer Augustin Zauchi? How do you say that? Has noted that, quote, a campaign was begun against the CNT and the FAR of the same character as that employed against the POUM. The anarchists and syndicalists were held responsible for everything that did not function smoothly, end quote. Augustin Zauchi, I don't know if I can say that, but was a German, lived from 1892 to 1984, was a German anarchist, anti-militarist, labor union official, and journalist. Augustin Zauchi traveled widely and wrote extensively about the Spanish Civil War and intentional communities. He was born in Ratibauer, Germany, now Raciborz, Poland. Augustin Zauhai added that, quote, such a malicious campaign had its effect. In July 1937, an insurrection arranged by the politicians broke out against the CNT-FAI in the town of Pravaya. The insurrection as such was unimportant, but it was symptomatic, end quote. Zauhai has also observed that, quote, grave discontent reigned among the workers. The revolutionary workers of Catalonia felt humiliated by the gradual curtailment of their revolutionary conquest, ... The representatives of the CNT-FAI vigorously opposed the application of police measures to meet the discontent of the masses, end quote. Fenner Brockway, who was like the leader of the Independent Labour Party in the UK. Yeah, Wikipedia says Fenner Brockway lived from 1888 to 1988 and was a British socialist politician, humanist campaigner, and anti-war activist. Fenner Brockway, leader of the British Independent Labour Party, subsequently studied the May events and concluded that their immediate antecedents, including an incident in Molins de Llobregat, in which a PSUC leader was killed, incidents during the nights of April 28th and 29th when, quote, anarchist and PSUC adherents were forcibly disarming each other, end quote. Growing conflict in provincial Catalan cities between CNT and PSUC elements, and suspension of all May Day demonstrations, quote, for fear of serious disturbances, end quote. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, another important event had occurred. In April, Slutsky, West European chief of the NKVD, had arrived in Spain. Joaquín had insisted that, quote, in Barcelona he supervised with, quote, Pedro, end quote, Ernotguero, the preparation for a coup of May, as well as the prefabricated spying charges against the POUM, which would justify its dissolution, the detention of its leaders, and their trial and condemnations, end quote. Victor Alba has noted that in the midst of all this, La Batalla continued to urge that, quote, the workers not allow themselves to be provoked, end quote. However, on the 3rd of May, they were provoked. The May events. New section. The 3-day uprising in Barcelona, starting on May 3, 1937, was a spontaneous revolt of working-class followers of the CNT, seconded by those of the POUM. Had either of these groups planned the insurrection, power in Barcelona and most other cities in Catalonia would have been taken by them. At first, the CNT-POUM forces dominated the situation, and they could certainly have seized control if the insurrection had been planned. Once the fighting broke out, a POUM delegation, including Nin, Joaquín, and Andreu, urged upon the CNT leaders formation of a CNT-POUM government in Catalonia. They also suggested that Joaquín go to Valencia to talk with Largo Caballero to explain that what was going on was not a civil war within a civil war, but an attempt to resist communist aggression. The CNT leaders rejected both suggestions, insisting that they could use their influence in the Catalan and Spanish governments to curb the communist bid for power. George Orwell, who was in Barcelona during the uprising, has given probably the most widely read description of it. Quote, the immediate cause of friction was the government's order to surrender all private weapons, and coinciding with the decision to build up a heavily heavily armed, quote, non-political, end quote, police force from which trade union members were to be excluded. The meaning of this was obvious to everyone, and it was also obvious that the next move would be taking over some of the key industries controlled by the CNT, On 3rd of May, the government decided to take over the telephone exchange, which had been operated since the beginning of the war mainly by the CNT workers, Salas, the chief of police, who may or may not have been exceeding his orders, sent 30 lorry loads of armed civil guards to seize the building, while the streets outside were cleared by armed police in civilian clothes. Wikipedia says Eusebio Rodriguez Salas was a Spaniard known for being the Commissar General of the Police Forces of Catalonia, aka PSUC, or the PSUC Counselor for Public Order in the Generalitat, who played a central role in the ignition of the Barcelona May Days. Back to the text. Salas, the chief of police, who may or may not have been exceeding his orders, sent 3 lorry loads of armed civil guards to seize the building, while the streets outside were cleared by armed police in civilian clothes. At about the same time, bands of civil guards seized various other buildings and strategic posts. Whatever the real intention may have been, there was a widespread belief that this was the signal for a general attack on the CNT by the civil guards and the PSUC. The word flew around the town that workers' buildings were being attacked. Armed anarchists appeared in the streets, work ceased, and fighting broke out immediately. That night and the next morning, barricades were built all over the town, and there was no break in the fighting until the morning of the 6th of May. The fight was, however, mainly defensive on both sides. Roughly speaking, the CNT-FAI POUM forces held the working-class suburbs and the armed police forces, and the PSUC held the central and official portion of the town, end quote. George Orwell. Wikipedia says the May Days, sometimes also called the May Events, refer to a series of clashes between the 3rd and 8th of May 1937, during which factions of the Republican side of the Spanish Civil War engaged one another in street battles in various parts of Catalonia, centered on the city of Barcelona. In those events, libertarian socialist supporters of the Spanish Revolution, such as the anarchist CNT and the anti-Stalinist POUM, which opposed centralized government, faced others such as the Republican government, Catalan government, and the Communist Party of Spain, which believed in a strong central government. The events were the culmination of the confrontation between pre-war Republican legality and the Spanish Revolution, which had been in constant strife since the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. Back to the text. Orwell also commented, quote, "There is no evidence that the outbreak had any direct effect upon the course of the war, though obviously it must have had it if it had continued even a few days longer. It was made the excuse for bringing Catalonia under the direct control of Valencia, hastening the breakup of the militia, and for the suppression of the POUM, and no doubt it also had its share in bringing down the Caballero government," end quote. New section, suppression of the POUM. The most prominent victim of the May events was Prime Minister Francisco Largo Caballero. The communists and the Russians wanted Largo Caballero out. Jesus Hernandez, Communist Minister of Education, made a violent speech attacking the Prime Minister. When Largo Caballero thereupon dismissed him, and President Manuel Azaña refused to accept this, Largo Caballero himself resigned. His successor was Juan Negrin, who was offered the post by Jesus Hernandez. When Juan Negrin told Jesus Hernandez that Juan Negrin was not a communist, the Stalinist leader answered, quote, "That is better. If you were a communist, we could not propose for you for prime minister. Want a premier friendly to the communists, nothing more, but nothing less," end quote. Jesus Hernandez. With Largo Caballero, the communists had also eliminated any significant CNT influence in the national Spanish government. Diego Abad de Santillan, the CNT leader, was commented on the effect of the fall of Largo Caballero and the anarchists of the POUM. Diego Abad de Santillan has written that the extermination of the POUM, quote, not being possible with our support, end quote, the communists, quote, took advantage of the events of May to achieve the result they had wanted for so long, end quote. Diego Abad de Santillan added that, quote, the repression against the POUM not only reflects the transfer of the internal polemics of the Russian dictators to Spain, but is a victory of the counter-revolution which is being organized in the very ranks of the anti-fascists, end quote. Once Largo Caballero was out of the way, the Spanish communists and the NKVD went ahead with their plans to outlaw the POUM. The first step taken in the early morning of June 3rd was the occupation of the La Batalla building. The occupation of La Batalla by the police and suspension of its publication. The next came with the arrest of leaders of the POUM, General Orlov, head of the NKVD in Spain, and Colonel Antonio Ortega, newly appointed Director General of Security, to carry out this roundup, but Ortega first contacted Jesus Hernandez, who in turn talked with Orlov. I don't know if I've already looked this person up in this reading because I'm reading it in kind of staggered steps, but Wikipedia says Alexander Orlov, Soviet defector, who lived from 1895 to 1973, was a colonel in the Soviet secret police and NKVD resident in the Second Spanish Republic. In 1938, Alexander Orlov refused to return to the Soviet Union due to fears of execution and instead fled with his family to the United States. Alexander Orlov is mostly known for secretly transporting the entire Spanish gold reserves to the USSR in exchange for military aid for the Spanish Republic, and for his book The Secret History of Stalin's Crimes. Second, Colonel Ortega. I don't know if this is the same guy. Antonio Ortega Gutierrez, who lived from 1888 to 1939, was a Spanish Republican military officer and acting president of the Madrid Football Club between 1937 and 1938 during the Spanish Civil War, directly involved in the defense of Madrid. Back to the text. General Orlov, head of the NKVD in Spain, ordered Colonel Antonio Ortega, newly appointed Director General of Security, to carry out this roundup, but Ortega first contacted Jesus Hernandez, who in turn talked with Orlov. Shortly afterwards, Ortega was called before a Communist Party Central Committee meeting where Palmiro Togliatti, the Italian communist, Vittorio Codovilla, and Orlov were present. Vittorio Codovilla was an Italian-born Argentine socialist and later communist politician. At first a member of the Italian Socialist Party, he emigrated to Argentina in 1912 and went on to hold prominent posts in the Comintern and the Communist Party of Argentina, of which he was General Secretary in 1941 to 1963 and President in 1963 to 1970. Back to the text. Shortly afterwards, Ortega was called before a Communist Party Central Committee meeting where Palmiro Togliatti, Vittorio Kodovila, and Orlov were also present. Thereafter, Ortega issued the orders for the arrest of the POUM leaders. The actual arrest came on the 16th of June. The POUM Executive Committee was meeting in the Instituto Maurín to discuss two items: whether Joaquín, as editor, should appear the following day before the court considering charges of subversion against La Batalla, and the Second Congress of the POUM, scheduled to open 3 days later. They had just adjourned when it was announced that the police were below with an order to arrest Nin, Andrade, Arcur, and Joaquín. Andreu Nin was subsequently murdered, and there is no question about the fact that Andreu Nin was killed by the communists. The rest of the top leaders of the POUM were kept in jail for almost a year and a half, and ultimately were brought to trial in Barcelona in October 1938. Julian Joaquín has described the trial in detail. Although the charges of POUM conspiracy with Falangistas and of treason were obviously not proven, the one defendant, David Rey, was totally absolved. Some of the rest were condemned to 11 years in prison, and the remainder to 15 years. The prosecution had asked for the death penalty. Joaquín has commented that, quote, the judges had been obliged to make concessions to make a compromise, and rather than accusations of concrete crimes, the sentence consists of a series of reproaches, end quote. Joaquín notes that the communist press did not publish the sentence. Those who were sentenced to prison joined forces with the principal officials of the National Penitentiary in Barcelona as the Franco forces approached the city. Their escape is recounted at length by Joaquín as something of a comedy of errors. Meanwhile, the POUM had been reorganized underground. Joaquín had said that after the arrest of the executive committee, quote, neither the party nor the youth reorganized in the underground had ceased to function even for a day. They published with the difficulties that one can imagine Juventud Obrera and La Batalla in reduced size, an executive member in Madrid, Alberto Aranda, at the head of a totally reliable small group, maintained liaison among Barcelona, Valencia, and Madrid. The new executive committee of the POUM, established the day after our detention, had established excellent relations with the CNT-FAI, with the UGT, and with the socialist left of Largo Caballero and Luis Araquistain. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. Luis Araquistain, Araquistain, not sure, lived from 1886 to 1959, and was a Spanish politician and writer, member of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, PSOE, from a young age. Luis Araquistain belonged to the circle of Largo Caballero and Tomás Meabe, of whom he was a close friend. In 1932, he was named ambassador to Germany, and in September 1936, ambassador to France, until May 1937, he took charge of buying arms for the Republican Army in the Spanish Civil War. He founded the journals España, Claridad, and Leviatán. Although his leanings before and during the war were decidedly revolutionary, later he became drawn to socialism, more, quote, European in character, and was moved to insist on the necessity of unity between monarchists and republicans in order that a peaceful transition from Francoism to democracy might be effected. The position made him some enemies, but he developed a great understanding with other moderate members of the PSOE. After the war, Luis Araquistain, Araquistain, went into exile in Great Britain and later Switzerland, where he died in 1959. Just before his death, Araquistain edited the Spanish language magazine of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, Cuadernos. Back to the text. The new executive committee consisted of Josep Rodes, Juan Faré, and José Ruiria. Most active and prestigious leaders in Laurida, Jordi Arquer, Wilde Baldo Solano, Secretary of the Youth, and Enric Adrober. Joaquín has noted that, quote, the second executive committee was itself arrested in the middle of 1938. Let's see if I can find anything for any of these names. According to Spanish Wikipedia, a Juan Falegaso was a railway worker in the Lleida region and political leader. Juan was imprisoned in Barcelona until the end of the war. He went into exile in France and joined the resistance. After being arrested in 1941, a military court sentenced him to 5 years in prison, which he served until the Nazi occupation ended. Juan Faré was killed by a group of Spanish communist militants who recognized him as the leader of the POUM. It was in 1944. He died in 1944. Wikipedia says Jordi Arquer lived from 1907 to 1981 and was a Spanish communist politician and writer from Catalonia. Vildebaldo Solano. Wikipedia says Villebaldo Solano Alonso lived from 1916 to 2010, was a Spanish communist activist during the Spanish Civil War, especially noted for his work with the socialist youth organizations as a member of the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, POUM. Most of his activities before and during the Second Spanish Republic were centered in Catalonia. And Enric. Okay. New section. Post-mortem. The POUM was driven underground in the last 21 months of the Civil War. Even before capture by Catalonia by the Franco forces in January 1939, the POUM was virtually impossible for the POUM to maintain any significant underground organization. All such possibility disappeared thereafter. The POUM was the first and most completely victimized target of the Stalinist effort to seize absolute power in loyalist Spain. whether or not their insistence was correct, that the revolution, which had taken place in Republican Spain and particularly in Catalonia at the beginning of the war, had to be maintained and expanded if the war was to be won, there can be little question about the fact that the Stalinist drive to power severely undermined the Republican cause. It split the parties and union groups that mobilized most of the popular support for the Republic. It deprived the loyalist cause of the talents and leadership not only of the POUM chiefs, but also of those CNT leaders and of the Largo Caballero, Indalecio Prieto, and right-wing factions of the Socialist Party. It also submitted the Spanish Republican government to control of a foreign power, the Soviet Union, whose generals gave orders to the Republican military, whose political servants manipulated Spanish politics, and whose secret police terrorized all political elements on the Republican side. The end. Thank you for listening.